Imagine this. You're deep in the heat of Saqqara. The sand has the kind of brightness that makes your eyes water, even behind sunglasses. Your flashlight trembles a little as you squeeze through a narrow passage and put your hand on a stone block that hasn't moved for more than 4,000 years. You lever it aside. The air that spills out is not just dusty. It feels thick, charged, as if the room ahead has been holding its breath since before your entire world existed. You brace yourself for the usual image, a sarcophagus in the gloom, maybe a shattered coffin, the dark outline of linen-wrapped limbs, the chaotic debris of ancient robbers. Instead, you see nothing. An empty floor, silence, no mummy, no coffin, no grave goods, just a rectangular void. But the walls look alive. Colors glow in the beam of your light, as if the paint has been drying for an hour, not 40 centuries. Lines are so sharp they seem almost dangerous. Rows of hieroglyphs cut into the stone so cleanly that if you ran your finger over them, you might cut your skin. These are not simple decorations. They look like a message, a statement left by someone who clearly expected to be remembered. The man whose name is written here is not Tutankhamun or Ramesses. It is Teti Ankh or Teti Nebu, depending on how you read the signs. A royal physician, a court insider in the late Old Kingdom around 4100 years ago, when the Great Pyramid still stood bright against the sky, while the political foundations beneath them were beginning to crack. His titles wrap around the chamber like a quiet boast. Conjurer of Serket, Director of Medicinal Plants, Chief Dentist. Each phrase opens a door. Serket, the scorpion goddess, was a deity of edge and ambivalence. Protector and punisher. A figure whose raised tail could kill or save. In a landscape where scorpions and venomous creatures were a daily risk, anyone who conjured Serket was more than a doctor. He was a broker between pain and relief, between poison and cure. As Director of Medicinal Plants, Teti Nebu appears in the record only alongside one other name. It is a title so rare that it marks him as someone who knew where the healing roots grew, how to turn resins and leaves and strange ingredients, crocodile dung mixed with honey, natron oils into ointments and inhalants that could keep breath moving through fragile bodies. As chief dentist, he stands at the edge of a different kind of suffering. In a world where bread was ground with stone and every meal carried sand that quietly stripped enamel away teeth, failed early. Infection moved straight into the bone. To be the one who eased that particular agony in the pharaoh's household was to hold a strange kind of power. All of that is written on the walls. What is not written is where his body went. The chamber is empty. There are no bones, no fragments of a coffin, no broken Ushabti figures. Robbers, the archaeologists say, came long ago. They took what they wanted and left the rest. But here, something feels off. Robbers usually leave chaos, shards, splinters, scratches, a sense of violence. In this room, the plaster is smooth, the paintings are untouched, the story is intact. Only the physical presence of the man is missing. So questions rise naturally. Was the tomb cleared with unusual care? Did someone remove only the body to disturb the dead in a way that went beyond theft. Was this always a cenotaph? A decoy shrine, while Teti Nebu's real resting place lay hidden somewhere else? Or is the emptiness itself the point of final layer of protection for a man who knew too much? Because the hieroglyphs do not only name his jobs, they invoke Serket's sting. They hint at protection, at venom that can turn back on the unworthy, at a goddess who guards not just from physical poison, but from those who might try to use poison as a weapon. If you stand long enough in that painted room, another possibility creeps in at the edge of thought. What if this space was never meant to receive a body at all? What if it was built as a warning? A message from someone who saw an empire beginning to fray and decided to speak in stone instead of in flesh. When the excavation team in 2024 stepped back from the initial shock, no mummy, no coffin, and started reading the walls, that is where the story began to bend. Because Teti Nebu was not working in a stable, peaceful Egypt, he served during the long reign of Pepi II, a pharaoh said to have ruled for around 90 years. On the surface, that sounds impressive. In reality, it meant an aging king, an exhausted system, and a court full of people who had watched central power thin out over decades. Unpredictable Nile floods, regional governors gaining strength, anxieties piling up in the background of palace life. Teti Nebu, as a royal physician, would have seen all of that from very close range. Perhaps the sharpness of those hieroglyphs is not just technical skill. Perhaps it is urgency. Most discussions of curses in Egypt start not with Teti Nebu's empty chamber, but with another tomb in another valley. The story is familiar enough to feel almost like folklore now. The Valley of the Kings. Howard Carter, after years of searching, finally finds the sealed entrance to KV-62, the tomb of Tutankhamun. The discovery ignites a wave of fascination, unlike anything archaeology had seen before. Gold, chariots, thrones, masks, and then, one by one, people begin to die. Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financier, develops a fever after a mosquito bite becomes infected. He dies in Cairo. Newspapers note with relish that the lights went out in the city at the moment of his death. Other figures connected to the dig succumb to various illnesses and accidents over the following years. The phrase Pharaoh's curse catches fire. The idea that those who disturb royal tombs will be punished is older than Tutankhamun, older than Carter, older even than printed newspapers. 19th century travelers like Giovanni Belzoni, pushing into musty chambers with dynamite and bravado, already wrote of collapsing tunnels, strange winds, and uncanny misfortunes. By the time Tut's tomb is opened, the pattern is ready to receive a new set of names. Yet when you walk slowly through the details, another picture emerges. No actual curse text is carved on Tutankhamun's walls. There are protective spells, of course, standard formulas from the Book of the Dead, asking the gods to safeguard the body. But there is no neat sentence promising death to anyone who opens the door. The deaths themselves, when examined closely, are real, but mixed. Some people who worked in the tomb died young. Others, including Carter himself, lived long lives. Statistics wobble, but do not quite settle into the clean, lethal pattern that the phrase curse suggests. That hasn't stopped the idea from clinging to Tut, to his mummy, to his golden mask, to any photograph showing his face. Part of the reason is psychological. Part of it may be something more physical. Modern studies have pointed to invisible hazards in sealed tombs. Radon gas, a product of uranium in the surrounding rock, can build up in enclosed spaces, Invisible odorless, it damages lungs over time. Measurements in some chambers show levels far above what would now be considered safe. In a body already weakened by travel stress or infection, that extra strain could be enough to tip the balance. Fungi thrive in old spaces where organic materials and moisture linger. Species like Aspergillus flavus have been found in tombs. If spores are inhaled in large quantities by people with compromised immune systems, serious respiratory illnesses can follow. A case in the 1970s where members of a Polish team opening a much later, non-Egyptian tomb died of lung problems traced to mold became another data point in the curse discussion. A pathogen, not a spell. Curiously, modern medicine has also turned one of these curse fungi into a potential ally. Aspergillus strains, once blamed for deaths in tomb-related illnesses, have been modified in labs to attack leukemia cells. A microscopic killer reshaped into a tool for healing. This kind of loop danger becoming cure fits eerily well with how Egyptians thought about their own gods. Serket again is a perfect example. Her scorpion sting embodies both threat and remedy. When hieroglyphic texts warn of a sting that devours the unworthy, they can be read in more than one way. As a curse on grave robbers, as a metaphor for political venom, as an image of disease, something that spreads silently without regard for status when certain boundaries are crossed. In a world where science and magic are not separate categories, a tomb could be protected in many layers at once. Spells on the walls, amulets on the body, poisons in the air whether fully understood or not. Modern radiation readings and fungal cultures can strip away some of the mystique. They can tell us that certain deaths were probably caused by biology, not by offended spirits. But they do not erase the deeper tension. Was any of this deliberate? Did the people who chose certain stones, sealed certain chambers, and carved certain warnings know that they were creating spaces that might be physically hostile to intruders? Or did they simply observe that tomb robbers sometimes died and attribute it to the gods? The same uncertainty hangs around Teti Nebu's chamber in Saqqara. The scorpion motifs, the invocations, the empty floor. Is this a threat, a shield, a ritual, or is it in some sense all three? The more one looks at these curses, the more they feel less like Hollywood maledictions and more like a particular way of seeing the world. Actions have consequences. Disturbing certain boundaries invites harm. Knowledge once uncovered cannot be easily put back. The old stories give that harm a face: Serket, Anubis, Osiris. Modern studies give it a mechanism: radon fungus microbes. What stays the same is the sense that tombs are not neutral spaces. They are places where many forms of danger and meaning are packed together in a small volume of stone. Step into one, and you step into more than a room. The legend of the curse keeps returning again and again, not just because of deaths around Tutankhamun, but because it speaks to a fear that predates both archaeology and science. The fear that the past is not finished with us, that the dead might not remain safely in their own time, that certain doors once opened will not easily close. Take Ramesses II. In life, he was everything a pharaoh was supposed to be: war leader, builder, father of an almost unbelievable number of children. In death, his body had its own long journey moved from his original tomb to a hidden cache at Deir el-Bahri to protect it from looters, then eventually brought to Cairo, then to Paris in the 1970s for conservation. The passport issued for that trip, listing his occupation as king deceased, is often shown as a joke. But stories from the flight add another layer. Crew members reported odd vibrations from the cargo hold. Technicians in Paris noted static around the mummy. Nothing definitive, just small, irritating anomalies. Hatshepsut's mummy, identified by matching a tooth in a canopic box to a jaw in an anonymous body, became another point in the pattern. Electrical issues in labs, flickering lights, a sense of presence reported quietly by people who are otherwise deeply trained in material analysis, not ghosts. In the Serapeum at Saqqara, the long, echoing corridors lined with massive granite sarcophagi, said to have held the mummified Apis bull's visitors, sometimes report low rumbles like distant thunder. Seismologists shrug. Quartz-rich granite and subtle ground movements can create sound. Yet the experience in that darkness can still feel like something breathing. It is here in these liminal sensations that another strand of explanation emerges. Granite especially. Aswan granite is full of quartz crystals. Quartz under pressure produces small electrical charges, a phenomenon called piezoelectricity. Pack enough of it in a confined shape. Add the immense weight of stone above and around. Subject it to constant micro-vibrations from the earth itself. You may, whether you intend to or not, create small electrical fields. Fluctuating charges. Spaces where sensitive instruments spike. Spaces where human nervous systems' delicate electrical devices in their own right might misfire a little. Visual blurs, sudden chills, prickling on the skin, sound distortions. If you lived in a culture that read those sensations through the language of spirits and gods, you might call that a curse, or a presence, or divine power. If you lived in a culture that read them through the language of neurobiology and physics, you might call them electromagnetic anomalies. Either way, the experience would be real. And so the Pharaoh's curse survives not only because of old headlines, but because when people step into certain places, something happens. In modern documentaries, night vision cameras pick up dust motes that look like orbs. Audio recorders catch faint sounds that, once filtered and amplified and listened to in the right mood, can sound like whispers. Thermal cameras reveal cold spots that move in ways that seem intentional. It is easy and important to say we are pattern-seeking creatures. We impose meaning on random noise. We splice coincidence into narrative. But the older Egyptian texts suggest something else too. That whatever we call curse may be less about vengeance and more about imbalance. A punishment in their world is not always a god throwing a lightning bolt. Sometimes it is simply the delayed result of moving through the world out of alignment, ethically, ritually, physically. Disturb a tomb built on a fault line with certain minerals in the walls, and you might breathe in spores and gas that slowly kill you. Disturb a social order already strained, and you might unleash civil conflict. Disturb your own sense of humility, and you might walk into risks that a more cautious person would avoid. The texts on tomb walls speak of a disease that no doctor can diagnose as a threat to those who violate certain spaces. From one angle, this is pure theology. From another, it is eerily close to a description of radiation sickness, chronic fungal infection, or slow poisoning. When Teddy Nebu writes of Serket's power to heal or harm, when his titles mix medicine with magic, he sits right at this threshold. Perhaps he did not know the word radon. He did not have a microscope. But he spent his life watching what happens when venom enters blood, when infections spread, when unseen agents change the fate of a body. His empty tomb, edged with scorpion imagery, can be read as a final version of that experience, a space that looks safe but carries an invisible sting, not a Hollywood curse flung by an angry ghost. A structural curse built into the conditions of the place itself. The old question, did the ancients know about radiation and microbes, may not have a simple yes or no. They knew that invisible forces could make you sick, could hollow out bones, could scorch lungs. They translated that knowledge into the language they had: gods, demons, blessings, punishments. We translate the same experiences into charts and lab reports. The tomb sits there, regardless, cool and sealed, waiting for someone to open it and step over the threshold between those two ways of naming harm. Leave the curses for a moment. Go deeper underground. Beneath the plateau of Saqqara, further out from the step pyramid, there is another complex. Long corridors, side chambers, massive stone boxes resting in rock-cut bays. The Serapeum. In the mid-19th century, Auguste Mariette, following the head of a buried sphinx poking out of the sand, hacked his way into this subterranean space. His accounts describe a central gallery, perhaps 500 feet long, with niches on either side. In each, a sarcophagus of enormous size. These aren't human coffins. They are granite monoliths big enough to fit a car. Some weigh around 80 tons. Their lids alone weigh more than many modern trucks. The interior surfaces are astonishingly smooth and square. The corners, sharp, the lids fitting so tightly, you could almost believe the stone had grown that way. The official interpretation is clear. The Serapeum is a burial place for the Apis bulls, animals identified in life by special markings, treated as incarnations of the god Ptah, mummified with full ritual after death. Greek influence later blended Ptah and Apis into Serapis. The name of the site reflects that. For more than 1,000 years, the story goes priests hauled these granite boxes into place to receive each sacred bull. And yet even within that conventional frame, questions pile up. Why such enormous boxes for beasts that would fit into smaller coffins? Why so much effort for chambers that, when opened in modern times, often contained nothing more than scattered bones and dust? Why is there so little soot on the ceilings, if torches were the only source of light, as workers maneuvered these stones through tight corridors? Engineers visiting the Serapeum in recent decades have measured the accuracy of the box's geometry and found tolerances that would challenge many modern machine shops. Parallel surfaces, precise angles, polished faces, recreating that with hand tools in tight tunnels is possible. Some experiments say, but brutally slow. The margins for error are minute. One slip and a corner chips. One misalignment and a box jams in a passage. The strangeness of this effort has opened the door to other interpretations. Some see the boxes not as coffins, but as devices. Energy containers, resonators, granitic batteries. Granite's quartz content gives it piezoelectric properties. Seal something inside a fermenting organic mixture, perhaps, and the pressure of gases building up could stress the stone, generating small electrical currents. Place that box underground in line with natural telluric currents in the earth, and those small currents might amplify. It is a highly speculative idea, but the fact that certain modern measurements show radiation or electromagnetic readings inside the boxes slightly higher than in the corridors has been enough to keep it alive. From there, the path to even wilder suggestions is short. Extraterrestrial visitors sharing tools that could cut and polish granite as if it were butter. Sonic levitation, plasma cutters, anti-gravity. The sarcophagi in this picture become something like abandoned machines. The bulls, if they ever lay inside, were cover stories. Religious camouflage for technology. Skeptics push back hard. Experiments with copper saws and sand can with time cut granite. Diorite pounding stones can shape it. Ramps and rollers, sand-filled pits, and controlled lowering can move enormous weights. The absence of soot could be explained by the use of reflective mirrors or careful ventilation. But even the most sober reconstructions admit that the level of control in the Serapeum is unusual. You can feel that standing in the galleries. The boxes aren't just big. They are imposing in a way that doesn't shrink, even when you remind yourself repeatedly that they were just for bulls. The echoes are sharp. A quiet footstep snaps back at you. Some visitors report a sense of pressure in their ears, like being underwater. Combine that with the stories of rumbles, with the knowledge that quartz vibrates, that granite responds to subtle seismic shifts, and a particular image takes root. The Serapeum as an underground instrument. Whether tuned by human hands, alien hands, or blind geology, it is hard to escape the feeling that you are walking through the body of something, not just a corridor lined with boxes. Again, the mind splits. One way, extraordinary human engineering, amplified by time and the play of the imagination. Another way, evidence that our picture of ancient capabilities is incomplete. Either way, a space that resists being reduced to a single neat sentence. If the Serapeum pulls attention downward into stone, into density, the step pyramid of Djoser pulls it upward. At Saqqara, it rises above the desert, like a rough staircase, its layers catching the sun. Traditionally, it is called the First Pyramid, a step between the earlier flat-roofed mastaba tombs and the smooth-sided giants at Giza. On the surface, it is rubble and limestone. Familiar, weathered. Beneath it is something else, a maze. Tunnels and shafts extending over kilometers, chambers lined with blue faience tiles meant to evoke the Nile's water. Granite plugs, false doors, a dry moat encircling the complex 60-plus feet deep, vast in volume, far more earth removed than would be needed to simply quarrel stone for the pyramid. For a long time, these underground features were treated as symbolic. Passages for the king's soul, labyrinths mirroring the journey through the underworld, the moat as a ritual boundary. Then in recent years, some researchers proposed another layer, not instead of the symbolic, but alongside it, a hydraulic system. Imagine a central shaft within the pyramid. Water drawn from a nearby lake or channeled flood fills it. A wooden platform floats on that water. Place a stone block on the platform, and as water rises, so does the load. At a construction level above, workers slide the block off, drain the shaft partially, and repeat. Around this, the vast moat acts as a catchment and reservoir. Rain in a wetter ancient climate, and diverted river water collect there. Channels and gates control flow. The under-pyramid maze includes not just tunnels for souls, but conduits for water. Computer models published in contemporary journals show that such a system could theoretically lift heavy blocks with much less brute force than long ramps. The pyramidal structure in this view becomes both a tomb and a machine. Critics point out the difficulties. No direct remains of pumps have been found. Waterproofing in certain shafts is hard to demonstrate. The climate today is arid. Imagining lakes and regular flows requires leaning on paleoclimate data and educated extrapolation. But the idea is hard to resist, especially when set alongside the dry moat's enormous scale. Why dig such a trench if its only purpose was symbolic? Why pattern it in ways that look like basins and compartments? Why line certain walls with niches, if not to stabilize or structure flow? From there, as in so many of these stories, the speculation extends further. If water moved within and around the pyramid, perhaps it did more than lift stones. Water vibrating in confined spaces can create powerful sound. Certain frequencies amplified by stone can resonate with the human body. Some of the underground chambers have acoustic properties that turn a simple chant into something overwhelming. Were these spaces used for healing rites, where sound and water combined? Were they part of an energetic system, with the pyramid acting as a resonator, capturing and focusing forces we now struggle to name? Some bring Atlantis into the picture here, a lost civilization drowned around the end of the Ice Age, survivors carrying knowledge of hydraulics and resonance to places like Egypt. Others jump straight to the stars. Extraterrestrial engineers seeding blueprints, then withdrawing. The step pyramid then becomes a prototype, the first attempt at building a multi-layered machine in stone. Later pyramids refine the design. Later civilizations remember only fragments. Again, the pushback is strong. Ramps can, with sufficient labor, do the job. There is no need to invoke underwater reservoirs and water lifts. Symbolism around water blue tiles moats can be explained as purely religious. Echoey acoustics can be a byproduct, not a purpose. But the hydraulic model lingers because it offers something that both skeptics and dreamers respond to. It gives the Egyptians more credit, not just as people who could pile stones, but as people who could observe the behavior of water pressure sound and incorporate those into their monuments. Whether or not the exact models are correct, the shift in thinking is important. The pyramid stops being a simple tomb or a simple symbol. It becomes a system, something that interacted with its environment in more ways than one. In that sense, it fits well with Titi Nebu's world, medicine and magic interwoven, conduits in the body, conduits in stone, balance and flow as central concerns. He may never have set foot under Djoser's pyramid. It was already ancient by his time. But the mindset that produced it, seeing water as a mover of both stone and spirit, was part of the air he breathed. Leave the blocks, return to a face. In a museum in Berlin under controlled light, one of the most reproduced images of ancient Egypt stares out over a room, the painted limestone bust of Nefertiti. The long neck, the tall blue crown, the eyes that seem unnervingly both idealized and individual. Her name means the beautiful one has come. Her actual life, when stripped of art, is harder to see. Around 1353 BCE, she appears as the great royal wife of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who upended Egypt's religious landscape by raising the Aten, the visible sun disk, to supreme status. In reliefs, she is not a passive background figure. She drives chariots, smashes enemies, wears crowns usually reserved for kings. In some images, she is as tall as Akhenaten. In a few, she appears to stand alone where a pharaoh normally would. She bears 6 daughters. One of them, Ankhesenamun, later marries Tutankhamun. Then around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti's name begins to thin out in the records. There are hints of a plague in the new capital at Amarna. There are also hints of a co-ruler named Smenkhkare. Some scholars see that as a separate male figure. Others suspect a female king in disguise, perhaps Nefertiti under another name. No clear death date, no obvious tomb, no mummy with unequivocal labels. This vacuum of certainty has turned the search for her remains into a century-long quest. At various points, candidates have been proposed. The younger Lady Mummy in KV-35, whose bent arm and shaved head gave an impression of royalty, was suggested as Nefertiti until DNA tests showed she was both the mother of Tutankhamun and a sister of Akhenaten, another figure in that tangled dynasty. Unidentified female mummies with royal poses have been scanned, reconstructed, compared to the Berlin bust. Genetic projects aim to match them to known family members. Zahi Hawass, the high-profile Egyptian archaeologist, has publicly stated more than once that Nefertiti's mummy lies among these candidates, waiting for final confirmation. He has teased Muon Scan's new DNA matches potential hidden chambers next to Tutankhamun's tomb. Each announcement raises expectations. Each wave of testing brings both data and more questions. Around the edges of this, stories have sprouted. Some focus on politics. Nefertiti as co-ruler or successor may have been too powerful for later, more traditional regimes to remember comfortably. Hatshepsut, another strong queen, had her images smashed and names erased. Nefertiti's monuments at Amarna were dismantled when Akhenaten's religious revolution was rolled back. Her memory might have been deliberately blurred to smooth over a chaotic period. Others focus on the cosmic. Her elongated head, in some depictions, the almost inhuman symmetry of the bust, have fed ancient astronaut theories. In that lens, Nefertiti and Akhenaten become hybrids, part human, part something else. The Aten cult is reframed as worship of star beings. Her disappearance is recast not as death or exile, but as departure. CT scans of the bust in Berlin, which revealed an earlier, less idealized face carved beneath the painted surface, only added fuel. Perhaps some say that inner face showed traits deemed too strange. The outer plaster smoothed them away. From a sober angle, it is a story about artistic correction, taking a realistic core and overlaying it with the perfection expected of royal portraiture. From a more speculative angle, it becomes a metaphor for history itself, an underlying rough truth covered by a layer of myth. Supernatural tales attach themselves easily. Visitors to Amarna speak of strange breezes in an otherwise still air. Dream accounts describe a crowned woman asking to be left alone. Guards near certain mummies report electromagnetic spikes, small malfunctions, as if a presence resists being pinned down. Whether these are products of suggestion of environment or of something more, they contribute to Nefertiti's aura. She exists as an absence more than as a body. Her influence is everywhere, in images, in the genes of descendants, in the architecture of Amarna, in the religious shockwaves that followed her husband's experiment. But the physical, she remains elusive. In that way, she shares something with Teti Nebu's empty tomb, with Thutmose Titu's stripped chamber, with the untouched wrappings of the Bashiri mummy. Presence without straightforward presence. A name, a face, a set of traces, and then a gap. The search for Nefertiti's mummy is on one level about solving a specific historical puzzle. On another, It is about our discomfort with such gaps. We want stories to close. We want remains to match faces. We want the people who haunt our imagination to have an address. When they don't, other possibilities rush in to fill the space. Exile, conspiracy, cosmic recall. Until her body is definitively found, or definitively ruled out among the candidates, Nefertiti will continue to sit at that intersection between careful excavation and wild imagining, between dynastic chart and star map. Step away from royal intrigue. Step into a different kind of power. An ancient Egyptian healer, working by the light of oil lamps, had no antibiotics, no x-rays, no digital monitors. But they did have something that in its own way can feel just as uncanny. A willingness to mix observation with ritual until the line between them blurs. The medical papyri that survive the Edwin Smith the Ebers do not read like spells alone. They read in many sections like case notes. Injuries are described with clear eyes. A wound to the head, bleeding from the nose and ears. A break in the vertebrae, loss of movement in the legs. Remedies are suggested, but sometimes the conclusion is simply an ailment not to be treated. They stitched wounds with linen, used honey to dress them, recognized that certain plants eased fever and pain. They set bones with splints. They recognized in practical terms what worked and what did not. At the same time, every treatment is wrapped in a web of words. Invocations to Thoth, to Sekhmet, to Serket. Spells spoken over poultices. Amulets placed alongside bandages. To a modern reader, it is tempting to separate these into effective and superstitious. Yet honey's antibacterial properties, willow bark's pain relief, the soothing effect of certain oils on inflamed skin. None of these were understood in chemical terms at the time. They were discovered through a mix of trial error and what we would now call placebo and context. Perhaps the spells were part of that context. Words that calmed the patient, words that anchored the healer, words that created a frame in which healing could happen. In the tomb of Teti Nabu, those strands are woven tightly. As director of medicinal plants, he would have overseen gardens, stores of dried herbs, recipes for salves. As chief dentist, he would have drilled, filled, splinted, pulled. As conjurer of circuit, he would have spoken to venom in the language of gods. Some of the ingredients named in medical texts sound strange to us: crocodile dung, ox hooves, mouse bones. Yet when broken down, acidity, alkalinity, texture, and compounds in these mixtures can sometimes be mapped onto real effects. Castor oil as a laxative, garlic with antimicrobial properties, natron cleaning and drying wounds. A pregnancy test described in one papyrus involves urinating on barley and emmer seeds and watching how they sprout. Modern experiments have shown that hormones in pregnant urine can indeed affect germination. The line between magic and science is not as clear as we like to imagine. This blend opens the door for another layer of interpretation. Some see echoes of lost sources, Atlantean refugees, passing on advanced knowledge in coded form, extraterrestrial mentors, disguised as gods. Imhotep, the architect of Djoser's pyramid, and later a deified healer, becomes an emissary from elsewhere. Herbal remedies start to look like biotech, incantations like activation phrases. That leap is appealing in part because the sophistication of some procedures' attempts at tumor removal. Prosthetic toes, functional enough for walking dental bridges and gold wires, feels startling when placed in the 3rd or 2nd millennium BCE. But there is also a more grounded way to read it. People living close to life and death, without the insulation of modern drugs and diagnostics, paid very close attention. They could not name bacteria, but they could see that certain substances stopped certain smells, certain kinds of rot. They could not define hormones, but they could notice patterns in bodies and plants. Their world was not silent. It was full of gods and symbols. So the knowledge they built clothed itself in that language. What we now call Egyptian medicine is not a mysterious anomaly dropped into history from nowhere. It is a long, patient accumulation of practical wisdom, wrapped in myth, sometimes reaching results that still surprise us. The mystery perhaps lies less in the remedies themselves and more in what did not survive. How many papyri burned in the fires that consumed libraries? How many techniques were held within lineages that ended during famines, plagues, invasions? When we look at the few scrolls and tombs we have, we are seeing the tip of something that was once much broader. Teti Nebu's empty chamber becomes in that light a symbol, not just of a missing body, but of missing knowledge. A room full of titles and hints. No scrolls, no jars, just enough carved on the walls to let us guess. Now narrow the focus even further, from the whole body to the mouth. In a land where bread was ground between stone and dust, pervaded the air, every meal carried tiny particles that scraped enamel away. Over years, this invisible sandpaper wore teeth down to stumps, dentin pulp nerves, everything sensitive lay exposed. X-rays of mummies show the results. Attrition, cavities, abscesses that ate into jawbones, infections that would have caused throbbing pain, headaches, possibly even systemic illness. This was not a rare affliction. It was the background condition of Egyptian life. Against that, a whole parallel craft grew dentistry. The earliest toothpastes recorded in the Ebers papyrus mix crushed rock salt mint iris pepper. Later recipes include ox hooves, ashes, honey. Natron adds its alkaline bite. It is easy to imagine these pastes feeling harsh. It is also easy to see how they would shift the chemistry in the mouth in ways that slowed decay. Mouthwashes combining celery salt, honey, aim at soothing inflamed gums. For more severe problems, the texts and the bodies converge. Drilled holes in teeth with linen and resin packed inside primitive attempts at root canals. Gold wires binding loose teeth together. Bridges carved from bone or ivory, wired into gaps. Prosthetics as simple as a wooden toe show the same willingness to intervene. The fact that some of these devices seem to have been used in life, not just attached after death for cosmetic reasons, suggests that Egyptian dentists were not merely decorating corpses. They were trying to help people chew, speak, live. Teti Nebu, with his chief dentist title, sits right at the top of this craft. His patients would have included Pepi II and the royal court. Their bread was as gritty as anyone's, their nerves no less sensitive, their expectations likely higher. In his hands, the line between therapy and ritual would have been thin. A paste applied with a spoken spell. A drilled tooth accompanied by an invocation. Pain numbed with fermented drink or plant extracts that in hindsight we recognize as containing opiates. It is not hard to imagine a room dimly lit, the smell of herbs and heated metal, the sound of someone chanting to drive away demons of pain, even as the bow drill turns. Modern genetic studies of ancient teeth reveal other traces adaptations to oral bacteria evidence that populations shifted over time in response to the pressures of diet and disease. From a strictly material point of view, this is evolution in action. From a more symbolic point of view, it is another form of inscription. Teeth carry stories about what people ate, about how they coped, about who helped them. The conspiracy-minded look at this and see possible links to lost knowledge, Atlantean techniques, alien tools. Imhotep, as a figure who knew not only how to stack stones, but how to reshape bone. Whispers about papyri and hidden archives describing eternal teeth formulas. Mummies with unusually preserved enamel. Possible evidence of experimental substances. The more grounded view sees an ancient dental crisis met with creativity. Mouse bones and unusual ingredients in some recipes may strike us as bizarre. But time and again, when the components are tested, underlying chemical rationales appear. It does not make the work less impressive. If anything, it makes it more. Because it shows that without microscopes or textbooks, healers watched closely enough to find patterns in pain and relief. They did not have our explanations. They had their own. Gods in the background, spells on the tongue, powders in the mortar. The result in many cases was the same someone whose next meal hurt a little less. Zoom back out to the mummies themselves. Not the idea of a mummy as a generic wrapped figure, but specific individuals. Tutankhamun, whose body was effectively cooked and glued to his coffin by resins, then hacked apart by early conservators to remove it. Ramesses II, passport in hand. Hatshepsut, identified by a tooth. Lady Di in China, whose preservation rivals and in some ways surpasses Egyptian techniques. Utsi in the Alps, dried and frozen by ice. Each of these preserved bodies holds a story that twists between simple human fragility and stranger implications. Tutankhamun's DNA shows malaria bone disease inbreeding. His club foot explains the canes. His early death fits a pattern of stress in a royal line under strain. At the same time, the way his body was treated, drenched in oils that carbonized wrappings, heated, chiseled, speaks to a period when archaeologists were still learning quite painfully how to touch the dead. Ramesses' arthritis and abscesses point to the physical cost of long life. His red hair hints at ancestry lines. His passport hints at bureaucracy crossing into ritual. Hatshepsut's likely cancer, possibly linked to a skin cream, sits next to her political erasure. In life, she was powerful enough to rule as king. In death, her successor tried to smash her name from stone. Her body remained quietly carrying tumors, diabetes, an ordinary human end. Lady Di, embalmed in nested coffins with mysterious fluids, challenges assumptions about what non-Egyptian cultures did or did not know. Her flexibility after 2 millennia shocked observers. Tests suggest herbal compounds and airtight conditions, not magic. Ötzi's tattoos align with acupuncture points used thousands of years later. His last meal, his injuries, his gear. All tell of a man moving through a landscape, not through a myth. The Bashari mummy, wrapped in such intricate linen that no one has dared unwrap it, physically sits between these extremes. CT scans show a body, amulets, patterns. The outermost wrappings form geometric designs like a woven pyramid over the face. The inner layers resist imaging, holding their secrets. In that resistance, speculation grows. Is he an ordinary official, preserved at the Ptolemaic twilight? Or someone with a role we have forgotten? Are there scrolls pressed against his side? Metal items tucked between layers? Early attempts at technology we do not recognize? Museum staff report glitches around his case. Faint sounds, odd thermal readings. Some faint, some feel watched, others feel nothing at all. All of these mummies, natural and artificial, share one quality. They create a continuity that the living mind does not quite know what to do with. We are used to thinking of the past as gone. These bodies say not entirely. You can look at the skin of a person who lived 3,000 years ago, see the lines on their face, the work of their muscles, the aftermath of their injuries. You can scan their bones, map their genome, reconstruct their diet. In some cases, you can do this so well that they feel dangerously close. Close enough that stories about curses and restless spirits feel less like superstition and more like a way of expressing discomfort. With the fact that the boundary between then and now is not as solid as we would like. Within the Tartaria narratives and other conspiracy webs, mummies sometimes become evidence of hybridization, of lost branches of humanity, of alien experiments. Within more cautious frameworks, they are evidence of migration, adaptation, disease care. In both, they are not inert. They act. They change how we imagine ourselves. The dead, in this sense, are still working. Behind many of these recent insights stands a quiet revolution, not of shovels or picks, but of sensors. In 2025, Egyptian archaeology looks as much like physics and data science as it does like traditional digging. Synthetic aperture radar, originally developed for aircraft and satellites, sends microwave pulses into the ground and measures their echoes, building images of buried structures without turning a single spade of earth. At Giza, such scans have revealed what looks like a complex of anomalies under the plateau, possible tunnels, possible chambers, possible remnants of older constructions. Muon tomography uses cosmic particles that constantly stream through the atmosphere. By measuring how many muons pass through different parts of a pyramid, researchers can see where stone is dense and where there are voids. This is how hidden cavities in the Great Pyramid were first detected. It is also how new voids in other monuments, including parts of Saqqara, are now being mapped. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, hyperspectral imaging from drones and satellites. All these tools turn sand and stone transparent on screens. AI systems chew through this flood of data, flagging patterns, rectilinear shapes, repeating signals that suggest human activity. Machine learning models help predict where undiscovered tombs might lie based on subtle correlations. DNA sequencing of bones and teeth builds family trees across centuries. Virtual reality reconstructs spaces too fragile or dangerous to enter physically. People around the world can walk digitally through Thutmose II's flooded tomb or down the Serapeum's gallery. This technological suite does more than accelerate discovery. It changes the texture of mystery. On one hand, it promises demystification. Hidden chambers become coordinates. Unknown mummies become individuals linked by genetic markers. Rumors of cities beneath pyramids are either confirmed as structures or dismissed as noise. On the other hand, it introduces new layers of weirdness. Radon readings, electromagnetic signatures, thermal anomalies, digital glitches, AI simulations that produce unexpected images. When a muon scan shows a chamber no one expected, the mind can go in two directions. One, another room filled with artifacts, or empty, waiting for a careful, rational explanation. Two, a machine space finally revealed a node in some ancient technological grid. When a VR reconstruction of a tomb gives someone a sense of presence, they might write it off as immersion. Or they might feel quietly that some part of the site's spirit has traveled with the data. These tools are neutral. Our interpretations are not. They can be used to reinforce a view of Egypt as a purely human, if brilliantly creative civilization. They can also be used to spin more elaborate tales of Atlanteans' aliens' resets. The difference lies less in the hardware than in the stories we layer on top. Standing in a lab watching faint outlines of a skeleton appear on a screen as a CT scanner moves around a sealed mummy, it is hard not to feel both things at once. Awe at the clarity, unease at the intrusion. Finally, step outside Egypt. Natural mummies' bodies, preserved not by human hands, but by the environment itself, stretch the story in other directions. Ginger in Egypt, dried and preserved in sand before deliberate mummification developed, shows that the desert could do the work on its own. His curled pose, basic grave goods, and intact hair suggest that the idea of the body lasting beyond death was observed before it was engineered. In the Atacama Desert, the Chinchorro people went further than nature, but also let nature assist them. Long before the first Egyptian pyramids were planned, they were disassembling and reassembling bodies with clay and reeds, then letting the desert air finish the process. Some of their dead, and some who were simply buried shallowly dried so completely that skin and hair remain thousands of years later. In the Sahara, naturally mummified individuals in the Caucasus Mountains, wrapped not in linen but in time, and heat point to populations and practices that complicate any simple story of North African history. In the Alps, Otzi was held by ice, his flesh and equipment locked in a frozen, slow-motion collapse. In China, Lady Di lay in layers of lacquered coffins, charcoal and clay, her body bathed in a strange reddish liquid that seems to have cut off air and bacteria so effectively that her skin organs and even blood type could be examined. In a Buddhist statue, a monk who practiced self-mummification sat still for so long in such carefully controlled conditions that his body dried and remained inside the sculpture, turning a religious icon into a literal container of a person. These cases show that Egypt does not have a monopoly on the idea that bodies can last. They also underline a constant tension in how we respond to such longevity. Part of us wants to see scientific opportunity, new genomes, new information about ancient diets, diseases, climates, new ways to understand where we come from. Part of us wants to see warning, lines not to cross, lives that should be left alone, forces biological, spiritual, or both that might push back if we probe too far. Conspiracy theories weave these bodies into grander schemes. Ghost lineages in the Sahara and unusual DNA in Otzi become evidence of forgotten branches of humanity. Lady Di's tissues become proof of lost elixirs. The monk in the statue becomes an interface to other dimensions. Atacama mummies become data storage devices for non-human experiments. Museums in these narratives are not neutral, they are vaults. Labs are not simply research spaces, they are testing grounds. And sometimes reality gives these stories hooks. Electrical issues around displays, allergic reactions to ancient molds, strange dreams reported by staff who spend long nights on duty. Psychology and physiology explain much of this. We are suggestible when tired, when primed by stories, when surrounded by death. Yet the effect on our imagination is the same. We feel viscerally that the past is not dead weight. It exerts a kind of pressure. The more we scan, analyze, and reconstruct, the more that pressure rises. The question is less, are curses real, or were aliens involved, and more? What does it do to us to live in intimate contact with so many preserved fragments of other times? Does it make us wiser, more humble, or does it tempt us to see everything, including our own time, as yet another layer waiting to be excavated by someone else? If there is a single thread tying together Teddy Nebu's empty tomb, Tutankhamun's curse, the Serapeum's boxes, Djoser's hydraulics, Nefertiti's missing body, Egypt's hybrid medicine, global mummies, and 21st century scanning technologies, it might be this: we are always standing on floors we did not lay. In February 2025, when the tomb labeled C4 for over a century was finally identified as belonging to Thutmose II, the announcement was framed as a triumph. The last missing royal tomb of the early 18th dynasty found at last. A sloping corridor, a damaged chamber, fragments of alabaster jars with the king's name, pieces of painted ceiling with stars. No sarcophagus, no mummy. Flood damage, emptiness. Yet even that emptiness filled a gap. It confirmed that a burial had taken place. That priests faced with water seeping in had likely moved the body elsewhere. That the neat line of pharaohs in textbooks had one more anchor point in the ground. It also underlined again how vulnerable these anchors are. A little water, a little time, and a king's resting place becomes a hollow room. In their own time, Egyptians built enormous systems around the belief that death is not an end. The heart weighed against Ma'at's feather. The field of reeds mirrored from the Nile's banks. The Duat's 12 hours, Osiris rising. Negative confessions I have not stolen. I have not caused pain spoken before 42 assessors. They diverted resources on a scale that still takes the breath away to prepare for that journey. They did this in part out of fear, in part out of hope, in part out of a sense that the universe itself runs on balance and that what you do will sooner or later be weighed. Today, we do not embalm rulers with natron and linen. We do not carve spells on sarcophagus lids in hieroglyphic rows. We do, however, send beams of muons and radar through their tombs. We unroll their bandages digitally. We reconstruct faces, sequence genomes, publish their ailments and family secrets. We extend their presence into our world in ways they could not have imagined. In doing so, we also expose ourselves to their ingenuity, to their mistakes, to their failures, to the limits of our own interpretations. The modern tools that pierce stone do not only uncover the past, they also uncover the assumptions we bring with us. If you lean towards seeing humans as always and only the product of steady linear progress, you will use those tools to reinforce that line. If you lean towards seeing hidden orders, resets, alien interventions, you will use the same data to draw different curves. Egypt sits comfortably in both kinds of stories. Its monuments, medicines, mummies, and myths are solid enough to ground careful science and strange enough to sustain more esoteric readings. In the quiet spaces, tombs at night labs, humming museum halls, after closing those readings mingle. The empty plinth where a sarcophagus once stood. The scanner buzzing around a wrapped body. The radar echo suggesting a void no one has yet touched. These are the contemporary versions of standing at a tomb entrance with a torch. Moments when we choose to step in or to step back. The old texts framed that choice in terms of curse and blessing. Enter unprepared, and you might meet something that will undo you. Enter with respect, and you might learn what you need to know. The new tools frame it in terms of ethics and curiosity. Probe too aggressively, and you might damage something irrecoverable. Refuse to probe at all, and you might leave entire chapters of human experience unread. Between those poles lies a slower path, one that looks a lot like the way these stories have unfolded tonight. Not a rush to verdict, but a willingness to circle, to ask more than once from slightly different angles. Is this a tomb or a machine? Is this a curse or a side effect? Is this body an individual or a data set? Is this mystery an invitation or a warning? For a listener drifting towards sleep, these questions do not need to be settled. They can simply be held. Teti Nebu's sharp hieroglyphs, the scorpion goddess, Tut's darkened chamber, the heavy granite boxes, the step pyramid's imagined water lift, Nefertiti's unmapped grave, the healer's hands, the worn teeth, the preserved faces, the untouched wrappings, the flooded tomb, the feather and the heart. Images from different epochs linked by a single quiet realization. The past is not flat. It has depth, layers of stone, layers of ritual, layers of forgetting and remembering. And we, for a short while, get to walk on the newest layer, listening. If these long, winding journeys through Egypt's shadows help you rest, if they give your mind somewhere spacious to wander, while your body lies still, then let them stay with you just long enough to soften the edges of your own day. Wherever you are listening from, whatever time glows on your clock, the same stars that watched over these tombs still hang above you. The same questions are still open. What do we do with what we inherit? How do we treat what we do not fully understand? And when we finally lay down, in whatever form our own culture chooses what trace of us will someone or something encounter thousands of years from now? For tonight, it is enough simply to know that such encounters are possible. That stone can remember. That flesh can linger. That curiosity can cross almost any distance. Let that be the last thought before sleep. Not an answer, a door left gently ajar. Before sleep takes over completely, try letting the pace of all this slow down one more notch. Not to add more information, just to sit for a while inside what has already been laid out. Picture yourself not as an observer on a screen, but as a quiet figure moving through these places after everyone else has gone home. The tourists are gone. The guards have done their last round. The lights are low running, just bright enough for cameras and sensors that never really sleep. You are alone in a museum gallery. On one side of you, a glass case holding a mummy, its wrappings crisp and brown-painted coffin behind it. On the other, a fragment of tomb wall from Saqqara covered in hieroglyphs that once wrapped around a chamber, like the one built for Teti Nebu. You've heard all the theories. You know about radon and fungi and how bodies dry in certain conditions. You know about how CT scanners see through linen, how DNA tests link kings and queens, how radar finds voids under stone. You've also heard many times the other stories. Curses, lost tech, star beings, secrets in granite boxes, voices in the dark. Standing here with the air conditioning humming softly and the floor polished to a quiet shine. None of that is loud. It's just present. You look at the hieroglyphs, sharp lines, birds and reeds and arms and eyes. The names and titles of a man who practiced medicine, who treated teeth, who spoke to a scorpion goddess in the language of his time. A man whose body is gone, whose tomb is empty, whose work now exists mostly as an inscription on a wall in a place he never imagined. You look at the mummy. Layers of cloth wound around a person whose world has vanished, whose skin once felt hot sun and cool stone, whose teeth once bit into gritty bread and herbs, whose chest once rose and fell through fevers and calm nights. All of that is over, and yet something of it is still here, close enough to fog the glass, if breath could cross that boundary. The mind does something strange in that moment. It doesn't really care whether curses are real in any external sense. It doesn't really care whether there were aliens or only very observant humans. It doesn't even care for a second about which specific pharaoh or healer or queen this was. What it feels instead is thickness. Time folded up so that 4,000 years, 200 years, and right now, all press lightly against each other. Some part of you imagines a hand reaching out from the linen. Another part imagines a lab technician checking sensor readings. Another part imagines stonecutters at Saqqara guiding a chisel along a line that will one day sit in a glass box in a different continent under different lights, watched by someone whose language they could not anticipate. That braid of old belief, modern analysis, and your own present awareness is where these stories have been moving all along. Back in the desert, the step pyramid of Djoser stands against the sky. Beneath it, shafts and passages carved into rock may once have moved water sound and bodies. They also move imaginations. Whether they were hydraulic engines or symbolic pathways, or both, they were cut by hands that knew stone intimately. In the dark under that plateau, the granite boxes of the Serapeum sit in their niches. Bulls once lay in some of them, bones and dust in others. Their carved surfaces reflect torchlight flashlight beams, the soft wash of modern LEDs. You've walked there in your mind already. You've felt the ludicrous mass of those lids, the way a whisper bounces back too sharply, the sense that the floor is bearing more than mere weight. Science standing next to you explains quartz piezoelectricity echo patterns. Myth standing on your other side whispers energy, resonance, spirits, machines. There is no need in this space to push one away entirely. You can let both speak, knowing that neither on its own will ever exhaust the place. The same goes for Nefertiti. Her bust in Berlin, perfectly lit, has a way of feeling more real than any mummy. It's easy to imagine the neck moving, the eyes widening, the lips opening to say something in a language no one now alive can speak from instinct. Yet her body, wherever it lies, is as ordinary and as fragile as anyone's. Bone, dried tissue, the marks of time. Searches for her tomb, scans for hidden chambers, DNA models. All of these are in their own way, acts of respect and acts of intrusion at once. Respect because they admit that her story is unfinished. Intrusion because they demand to see what might prefer to remain hidden. That double feeling hangs over every new find. when Thutmose II's damaged tomb was mapped and labeled, when a fresh shaft at Saqqara yielded another cluster of coffins, when a new set of scans hinted at voids inside pyramids, excitement and reluctance. Open it. Maybe leave it closed. You can feel both at once. Lying in the dark, listening to these accounts, you have the luxury of not choosing. You can drift between the urge to know and the acceptance that some things will and perhaps should remain imperfectly understood. That, in a way, is where the old idea of a curse becomes useful again. Not as a threat of supernatural punishment, but as a quiet reminder that knowledge always comes with a weight. Every tomb unsealed changes something. Every mummy scanned reveals something, and at the same time strips away a layer of distance the dead once had. The Egyptians tried to control that weight with spells and architecture. Modern archaeology tries to control it with ethics committees, permissions, careful handling. You as a listener control it in a smaller, more personal way. By choosing how you hold these stories inside yourself, you can turn them into fuel for fear, or arrogance, or endless suspicion, or you can let them be what at their core they already are. Evidence that people long before us were thinking hard about the same things that keep us awake now. How to heal and how to hurt. How to remember and how to forget. How to honor the dead and how to leave space around them. How to live a short life in the shadow of very long time. Egypt's tombs, pyramids, and mummies are dramatic expressions of those questions. But they are not the only ones. Everybody in every era leaves something behind. Most of it is not stone or gold. It's smaller, softer, harder to display. A change in someone's habits because of a conversation. A line in a notebook that shifts how another person thinks. A building choice that makes a city kinder or harsher to those who walk through it. From far enough away, even those traces become archaeology. Some future person looking back at our time with their own scanners and theories and myths will be tempted to do exactly what we do with Egypt. Explain as much as they can. Romanticize what doesn't fit. Worry that they are missing something important beneath the surface. You won't be there to correct them. But you are here now, listening, feeling the pull of these older layers. If there is any lesson hiding quietly inside all of this, it may not be about how to avoid a curse or how to decode an alien device. It may be much simpler and much more difficult. To remember for a few extra breaths that you are part of this same long, uneven flow. That while you lie there in your room at this hour, people on the Giza Plateau are closing gates for the night. Air is thickening again inside sealed chambers. Sensors are humming. Sand is shifting a little over old entrances. A beam of muons is passing through stone, indifferent to whether anyone is measuring it. And somewhere in a case behind glass in the cool of a museum, a wrapped figure is simply lying there, carrying its own version of all these questions in silence. You don't have to solve them. You only have to let them exist alongside you for a while, like distant stars in the sky you can't quite see through the ceiling. Then when your eyes finally close, you can let the desert go, the stone, the dust, the glyphs, the sounds. They will still be there tomorrow. They have waited this long.